Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for being here. This is a really interesting topic to me. First off, because it didn't work with beans in the beginning. So now that it works, it's actually a really interesting thing to share with people. Backing up is a really critical, important thing for you to do, because if you think about it today, Virtual Center and the associated PSC, they're actually pretty important. Gone are the days when you could restart VC and nobody knows. I sort of like those days, because I did actually have to do that on occasion, and nobody was impacted. But nowadays, if you try and restart your VC, there's a very good chance that some service will be impacted. So being able to bring it back as quick as you can is why I actually wrote the paper and now doing this talk, so that more people know how to do it quickly, but also correctly. But I should start by saying I'm Michael White. I'm part of the R&D team at Veeam. I'm a product manager, and I do other things as well, such as write papers and do presentations. So we'll just sort of jump in. We'll just skip over that. So this is what we're going to talk about today. But really, what it actually boils down to is this. I'm going to give you the information to do a successful backup and a successful restore. And I'm even going to tell you when you shouldn't do a restore. And here we go. So here's just a reminder of our architecture, right? Everybody's seen a virtual center or VCSA here, which is sort of nice. But then the PSCs provide some load balancing or whatever. But this is sort of an example. This is the Veeam example of my architecture in the lab. This is showing off all the things that Veeam can do, actually. In other words, backup from snapshots. This is sort of cool. I like being able to restore from a snapshot and never actually touching the virtual machines that are in production. But moving right along. So there's a couple of things, and in fact, most of what I'm going to share with you today is not really relevant just to Veeam. So if you're not a Veeam customer, this is still really good info. First thing is you don't do anything with the database. And I know there's people that say that you have to do things with the database, and you shouldn't. You absolutely should not do anything with the database, and you shouldn't do anything with respect to application consistency. The VCSA knows what it's doing. It knows it's being restored. You don't have to do anything to prepare it. I do suggest that the PSC and the VCSA are backed up in the same job. Now, the thing to remember, too, is your virtual distributed switches, your VDSs, they're actually partly on ESX hosts and partly in VC. So if you lose VC, you're going to lose some of your virtual switch configuration. And I like to suggest that you back it up as often as you back up your VCSA, and I'll give you some hints about that. So in this model, or in this sort of example, we've lost the VCSA. So what do? Well, we actually have to connect to a host in your backup product, because your backup product normally is going to talk to the VCSA. That's efficient. That's a good way to do it, but it's gone. So you're going to have to connect to the ESX host, and you're going to have to restore your VCSA. Now, the odds are it's not going to work. You'll get a successful restore, don't get me wrong, but the odds are if you're using VDS switching, you're not going to be able to ping your VCSA. And the reason for that is because you need to have, at start, an ephemeral port group. So in my lab, on my distributed switch, I actually have an ephemeral port group that I don't actually use except for when I'm restoring the VCSA. I restore it, I select the ephemeral port group, I can ping it, things are working, and then I change the port group to whatever the normal distributed switch port group I would use. And then I test. And this is just sort of a hint here. We don't just test by logging into VC. That's just one test. You also want to check things like, is VROps working, or is Log Insight working? The things that integrate. In my lab, I didn't put it here, but in my lab, I also use View a lot. That's how I connect when I'm traveling. So one of my other tests is, does View work? And in fact, some of those tests are what alerted me to the problem with the ephemeral port group not in use, because some of these things weren't able to connect to VC. Now, here's a much more fun model to work with. Here we've actually lost a PSC, but we still have a VCSA and PSC in the lab. So what we actually do is we repoint the VCSA to an existing PSC. And we have the command here. Very straightforward. Essentially, you're just establishing a relationship between VCSA and the PSC so they can talk. And then the next thing you do is you decommission the PSC that you lost. In other words, essentially, it's removing that name from the database or the text files or wherever it's being stored. And again, here's the a screenshot of the command. And then you actually don't restore the PSC. Takes too long. You deploy a new one. And then you test. Here's a little bit more interesting. Here we've actually lost our VCSA, and we've lost all of the PSC. This was a little scary to do in the lab because you just sort of deleted a whole bunch of stuff. In any case, what you do is you connect to the host, and you restore a PSC, one. And believe it or not, you got to wait a few minutes, because if you go too quick, it won't be ready yet. So literally, you wait approximately 5 minutes. And then you restore the VCSA. And if you can't log in, then you do the repoint exercise. And you point it at that one PSC. And then you see if you can log in successfully. You should be able to. And then you actually deploy new PSC to make up for whatever the numbers that you've lost. Does that make sense for everybody? Now here's some information about Veeam. I'm a Veeam guy and I like Veeam, so I'm using Veeam as the example here. But bear in mind, I've done this with other people's products as well. So I'm using Veeam, but it's not only Veeam. So this is the screen where you would enable or disable application consistency. And I've got a little red arrow pointing at where it is not enabled. So that's really important. And I'm stressing that because there are blogs on the internet that say you have to do application consistency, but that's way from the past and it's not true anymore. Now this screen is a little different. Even some of my coworkers were surprised at this screen. This is the screen that allows you to execute a script every time the backup occurs. And in this case, I think it's a pre-script. You can also do post-scripts. These are particularly handy, incidentally, for Linux backups. When you have to manually do application consistency because Veeam doesn't know how to do it in Linux, well, these scripts are how you could do really nice application consistent backups. But what we're doing here, this script I have, is actually it's going to export the VDS and put it in a nice file for you. So this is just where you would do that. Now here's some pretty important suggestions. The first one is each PSC should be configured with an AD connection. That means when you restore them, even if you're missing one, you still can use your AD credentials to log in. So very handy. I also suggest you have an ephemeral-based port group on your switch so that when you have to restore, you can always use it for that first connection. The next one is, you might laugh a little, but I really believe every one of you who works in this environment should actually practice this. Because those commands I showed you, in the screenshots, they're long, and some of it are 2 dashes and some of it is 1 dash. So practicing it just gets you a little more familiar, so when you're in a crisis and your boss is breathing down your neck, it'll just be a little smoother for you. I also know people that actually script some of this stuff out for a crisis, especially the deploying of the new PSCs, so it becomes really easy. But the fact is practice. And I wrote a technical white paper on this. I have a lot more example scenarios in the white paper and really good screenshots. So it's really useful, I think, because I only had a few minutes here. Incidentally, here's a link to the white paper. And then there's some other articles there that I think are useful. How to restore vCenter when, in fact, there is no vCenter to connect to. And I didn't write the script to back up VDS, but this very nice fellow did. And that's the link for it. And there's the vCenter documentation and the Veeam documentation and links there. And I think, yes, that is in fact the last slide. So thank you everybody for being here. It's a really good topic, I think. I hope it helps you guys. And on the front slide is my Twitter and my email. If anybody finds it doesn't help, then I would be very happy to hear that it didn't work. I much prefer to hear the bad and not the good, because I can learn or I can improve the paper with the bad or with the issues that you find, and I always appreciate that. So thanks very much.